Hello, and welcome to our event in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King. My name is Wendy Finkelman, and I'm the Director of Arts Education for VCA. I'm also part of the team of volunteers and staff that helped to organize today's event. And as I sit here in this empty theater, I feel sad that it's not safe enough yet for us to gather in person, especially as I remember last year we had a packed house and it was so powerful to see so many members of our community here. But I'm also glad that we're able to live stream the event, and I'm happy that you've tuned in today because we have an amazing lineup of speakers and performers. I want to begin by acknowledging that we gather on the traditional land of the Swabash people, and I want to honor and acknowledge the land itself and the people who have tended the land throughout generations. I want to thank Vashon Partners in Education for a grant that's helping to fund the event today. This year, we wanted to offer our community an opportunity to go deeper in racial equity and social justice work. And so each of the three speakers today is going to be offering a follow-up workshop in February. The workshops are sponsored by VCA, and so they're free of charge. And you can learn more about the workshops on the education page of our website, vashoncenterforthearts.org. And finally, I'd like to introduce Damond Arundel, who is our MC for today. Damond is a multi-genre writer, a poet, a performer, an arts and equity consultant. He's a friend of VCA, having taught numerous classes and workshops here, and he's also served as a consultant for VCA. And he is one of the most articulate and wise people I've had the pleasure to meet. So without further ado, Damond Arundel.
Good evening. Thank you, Wendy, for that introduction. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. My name is Damond Arundel, and I have the pleasure of emceeing this event in honor of the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Before we get into what I have to say, I just want to thank you all for being here. Thank you, Vashon, for hosting this event. And I welcome you to this. This event is going to be a mixture of performances as well as speakers. And I want to just dive right into it. I'm coming to you from across the water in Seattle on the unceded ancestral lands of the Duwamish, a people that are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. Today is January 18th, 2021. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would have been 92 years old today. He was assassinated almost 53 years ago. That's enough time to take a martyr, tone down his politics to only focus on the nonviolence in his message, and whitewash his image. Dr. King was a radical. He was against capitalism. He was against white moderate standards and behaviors. It's amazing what can happen over time. 1 year ago, we gathered together in person for this event, and pandemic was just a good Scrabble word. I believe that it's been it's funny that way. America has had lots of time to get things American genocide, which on certain levels still continues today and which America has never atoned for. The Peculiar Institute of Slavery, which only ended in name in 1865 and continues through the 13th Amendment, the enslavement of the incarcerated and the over-policing and mass incarceration of Black and brown people still ongoing. America has had time to get some things right. Right after slavery, there was a time called Reconstruction that showed promise, not because America did anything, but because Black people did, banded together and got a number of people elected, Black people elected to the Senate, the US Senate and Congress. And still, America reacted with nearly 2,000 racial terror lynchings of Black men, women, and children during this era from 1865 to 1876. It was 100 years before we had another elected Black official in the Senate. Now, while this might seem like ancient history, and you might wonder what this has to do with Dr. King, to honor his greatness, his legacy, we have to acknowledge what he was fighting against. The same greatness that was the reason, or rather, what jump-started his assassination, the cause for his assassination. Thinking about what's going on currently, 65% of white Americans have a negative view of Black Lives Matter and the movement's tactics. That's about the same percentage that denounced Dr. King and the civil rights movement in 1964. Reconstruction was progress. The civil rights movement, progress. But let's be clear. What exactly are we progressing against? Is the barrier to equal rights for me, a Black man, to be seen and treated no different than my fellow human beings? What is the barrier to that? This may be hard for some of you to hear, but the progress we have always needed is in the hearts and minds of white Americans. It is time. It has been time. We need all of you, as the late great Representative John Lewis put it, to get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and redeem the soul of America. There was another gathering of people that took place less than 2 weeks ago in Washington, D.C. Some call it a protest. Some call it a mob. Others a riot. Others an insurrection. It doesn't really matter to me what it's called so much. What I know is that they sought out violence. They planned to hurt people, and they did in fact kill people. I've seen fire hoses and dogs turned on Black children for doing so much less during the civil rights movement. I've seen tear gas and rubber bullets turned on indigenous protesters at Standing Rock, and I've seen those same summer. White Americans, I am asking you to look in the mirror. This is America. This is who we have always been. It's not all of what we are, but to ignore that side of ourselves is like ignoring a fire in the kitchen while taking a shower because the rest of the house is just fine. That hateful, violent side of us, America, is yelling and will no longer be ignored. We can't afford to ignore it anymore. That side is directly linked to an America that worships the white men who founded this country and ignores their flaws. Many of these white men were, they spouted about freedom whilst owning slaves. And to speak to that, a poem. America likes to say all men are created equal. and then call me lazy behind my back. So lazy, America put me to work for a few centuries. Lazy is the nicest thing America calls me. America still hasn't paid me. America held on real tight to crack that whip that cracked my skin, so my literal blood watered the roots of this thing America calls democracy, but never quite measures up. I'd say from the books I've read, it's maybe 3/5 of the way there. Funny, that number sounds so familiar. Where did I hear that from? Maybe America should try stretching democracy out by hanging it from a tree. I hear that makes a powerful statement. Like that guy Lincoln made a big statement with the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, even though he didn't really mean it. You might disagree. Maybe we've read different books. He backed it so hard it took 2 years for America to tell Texas to give back that thing they stole from me. America is still hung up on that 3/5 thing, because freedom and democracy, yay! But America wouldn't let me vote, or sit at a lunch counter, or walk into certain towns past sunset. Still won't let me go for a run, or take out my wallet without somehow ending up dangling from a tree. America really cares about stretching me out to reach my full potential. You believe in gravity, don't you? So on this holiday, I'm going to keep an eye out for my mail. It should arrive because not everybody recognizes this holiday anyway. Maybe that old paycheck will finally show up along with the rest of that democracy and freedom America keeps talking about. Sure does sound good. Thomas Jefferson asserted that black people were not capable of writing poetry. Casey Lemons, the director of Harriet, Talk to Me in Eve's Bayou, said, "White Americans, your lack of imagination is killing us. We need you to use your imaginations and put yourself in our shoes. We need you to get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and redeem the soul of America." And if any of this is upsetting you, good. I want you to feel something and then do something with it. Because right now, the mob that attacked the Capitol is what is representing white America the loudest. Dr. King said, whites, it must be frankly said, are not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. It is an aspect of their sense of superiority that the white people of America believe they have so little to learn. Yet in spite of this latent prejudice, this is also by Dr. King, in spite of the hard reality that many blatant forms of injustice could not exist without the acquiescence of white liberals, the fact remains that a sound resolution of the race problem in America will rest with those white men and women who consider themselves as generous and decent human beings. Nothing can be more detrimental to the health of America at this time than for liberals to sink into a state of apathy and indifference. One of the strongest forms of allyship or acting as a co-conspirator that I have ever seen was a video of a city council meeting. A white woman stepped to the podium to speak and then quickly stepped to the side to let a black man take her place. He promptly jumped up on the table and began to speak to the whole room. The officers present also quickly swooped in, ready to engage with nightstick in hand and violence. But the woman and an additional white man stepped in front of and behind the black man and acted as human barriers because they knew the police would not enact the same force on them. It was simultaneously brilliant and inspiring and enraging. I'm calling on you to fight. When we fight, when we march, we risk death. I'm calling on you to get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and redeem the soul of America. And at this point, we are going to move into our first performance. Leroy Bell is a beloved Northwest and national performing artist. He's performed twice at VCA shortly after his time as a contender on the hit show X Factor. He's written hit songs performed by Elton John, The Temptations, and Gladys Knight and the Pips, and is performing in this video with equally talented C.E. Smith. Leroy Bell will be performing at VCA via live stream on February 26th. Let's give it up for Leroy Bell.
Sunshine in my eyes, birds sing lullabies. I can hear babies cry, mama's hands are getting tired. No progress over here, they set us back 100 years. No dreamers anymore, democracy is out the door. God only knows how I miss those days. She only knows how I miss the way we were. America. Wake me up when it's done, when they block out the sun, and when they whisper the story, how the West was won in the blink of an eye, and the mountain of lies. We were sold down the river, your land and mine. Disillusion, mass confusion, a constitution, they're trying to burn it down. Are we living or being driven like sheep to slaughter? I really wanna know. God only knows how I miss those days. She only knows how I miss the way we were. America. Yeah, God only knows how I miss those days. She only knows how I miss the way we were. America. She only knows how I miss the way we were. America, yeah. knows how I miss the way we were. America, yeah, God only knows how I miss those days. She only knows how I miss the way we were. America, yeah, God only knows how I miss those days. She only knows how I miss the way we were. America, America.
All right, everyone, please give some warm applause and energy to Leroy Bell and G.E. Smith for that performance of America. I was hearing it and it was moving me, and I appreciate that. So, from that, we are going to move into our first speaker. I want to welcome Joanna Chacon. Joanna Chacon has been an educator in Boston and Seattle for over 10 years. Joanna worked as a Martinez Foundation Fellow studying race and equity in schools in the company of educators of color. She applied her learning as an educator teaching English, Spanish literature, and multicultural literature, and most recently in her role as co-executive director of Newton South High School's Human Rights Council. She is now the co-director of a new nonprofit, Educators for Anti-Racism. Please give a warm round of applause and some energy for Joanna Chacon.
Thank you, Damon. And before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Pawtucket. So I want to come to you and share what's going on with teachers right now, as we all as a nation grapple with how we are going to reach racial equity in our country. So this last week and a half has been, for many teachers, one of deep soul searching. It comes on the heels of a spring and summer of deep soul searching, and there are two questions that keep floating to the top. One is, am I being too political in the classroom? And another is, are teachers complicit in creating the national and racial climate by having educated or miseducated the nation's youth? My personal answers are no and yes. Before I explain my answers, I'd like to share the story of how a small book club became an international conference last summer. So last summer, myself and a group of teachers grassroots organized an international conference, the Educators for Anti-Racism Conference. It was, to my knowledge, the second of such conferences to occur in recent history. And if you were on the outside looking in, it would have looked like we knew what we were doing, but we didn't. At the end of the day, the conference lasted a week. It was 24 hours of webinars led by some of the nation's leading scholars on anti-racism in education, Dr. Bettina Love, Dr. Luis Leiva, Dr. LeGarrette King. But 3 months prior, there was no conference in the works. There wasn't even the seed of an idea in our heads. 3 months prior, we, along with the nation, were shocked to our core by the lynching of Ahmaud Arbery, of Breonna Taylor, and the brutal lynching of George Floyd. Not knowing what else to do, I began marching in the streets. I felt strong marching through the streets. It felt like something was happening. But in between marches, and as the marches started winding down, as I went back to my daily routine, I was left with the conviction that if real change was going to happen, it had to happen in everyday acts by average people like you and me. And so I did an everyday act. I sent my friend a text. I said, can you recommend any books to me? You see, I had plenty of conversations about race and equity, and I thought it was high time I started leading some conversations, running some workshops. But I felt I needed to prepare myself a bit. My friend, she's a PhD, she knows what's what. So I asked her, do you know any good books? And she recommended to me the book by Dr. Bettina Love, I Want to Do More Than Survive. And Dr. Love's words put a mirror in front of my face. I realized that I had to make some changes now. She said, teachers who say I close my classroom door and teach are doing their students a disservice. I was doing my kids a disservice because for most of my career, that is exactly what I had been doing, teaching anti-racism, but behind a closed door. She said, educators teach about Black and brown people and they focus only on their oppression. They don't teach the kings, they don't teach the queens, they don't teach Black joy. And she was not wrong. I had been doing just that, writing lessons and units about all the ways in which the system had oppressed Black and brown communities and nothing else. Nothing about how movements had been grown grassroots in these communities, how the racial progress that we see today is thanks to the courage and organizing efforts of Black and brown activists who came before us. She said, educators need to equip their students with the knowledge of how communities had advocated for themselves in the past and the knowledge of how students themselves could advocate for a better society. This was something as a teacher that I had never even considered. And so it was April and I had 2 months left with my students, enough time to try out these principles, and I did. I started bringing in guest speakers, grassroots organizers who explained to my students ways in which they could be involved even as teenagers. I started being vocal in my English department about anti-racism and what I was doing and what my colleagues needed to be doing if they were going to do right by our kids. I started bringing in Black joy. And you know what? It was like a match had been thrown on a pile of tinder with my kids. By the end of the year, some of my students were writing letters to the principal and to the superintendent outlining for them the changes that they demanded to see. And these people started writing back to me. I was getting emails from the principals, from the union leaders, asking for conversations, which I passed along to my kids. And my kids were like, I did that? My letter did that? Yes, you did that. You have power. They came alive in the classroom. And I could see for myself as an educator the road ahead. I was making mental calculations of the changes that I would make to my curriculum so I could empower my students the next year. Knowing I had struck gold, I started recommending to my colleagues that they also read this book. And a colleague who bought the book shared it on Facebook and she tagged me and I replied, why don't we start a book club? And pretty soon there was a list of people under that comment who had written, I'm in, I'm in, I'm in. Now I love my colleagues, but to put it plainly, they're all white. And as a Latina, I wanted to talk about this book with teachers of color. So I posted to my teacher affinity group and they started saying, I'm in, I'm in, I'm in. And pretty soon we had a diverse group of 30 educators who had signed up for this book club. And at this point, I wanted to say thank you to the woman herself, Dr. Bettina Love. And so I wrote to her, I went onto her website, I went to her contact me page, and I wrote some little fan mail. And I told her everything that I've told you. And on a whim, I invited her to the book club. You know, I didn't know if she was gonna say yes, but might as well ask. And to my great surprise, 2 days later, her book manager wrote me back and she said that Dr. Love was interested. But here's the thing. See, I was so excited. I told Dr. Love, like, we have 30 people. I could probably get it up to 50 people, you know, to make it worth her while. And so now I had the task of finding 20 more teachers. And so what did I do? I started inviting random teachers. I started posting to social media. I found emails on the internet. I just started sending invitations out left and right. And so 2 days go by and I look at the progress and hundreds have signed up, multiple states, even Canada was in. And at this point, I realized that we had an event on our hands. So I approached my English department, I approached the affinity group, and I told them I did a thing. Dr. Love's in it now. There are teachers from multiple states in it now, Canada. I asked them to help organize this thing. And emboldened by the team and their support, I started emailing more teachers. Word started spreading, and after it was all said and done, teachers had signed up from all 50 states and 24 countries, and the rest is history. So what has stayed with me from this conference is that anti-racism is work that needs all hands on deck. At a certain point in the frenzy of planning, some of the teacher organizers said, in order for this to be truly useful, we need to break it up into our departments, right? Because we need to know what anti-racism looks like in each content area. And at the end of the day, the work of anti-racism does come down to what happens in each teacher's classroom. And it may feel counterintuitive to think of anti-racism as something that happens beyond the English classroom or the social studies classroom, like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. But this problem of systemic racism is one that needs to be addressed by every single teacher, because every sector of society is infected with systemic racism, and every sector of society needs to do its part. And that translates into K-12, into clear work for every classroom teacher. And the problem is, though, that it hasn't been clear, because teachers weren't trained for this. We weren't trained to be anti-racist. To be honest, we were trained to be racist in our pedagogy. We didn't get it in K-12. Some of us went to schools when they were still telling us the enslaved were happy, that they were all right. I never read books by people of color. I never saw myself reflected, so no, we didn't get anti-racism training as students. We didn't get it in our teaching programs. To quote Dr. Love, teacher education programs on the topic of racism, diversity, privilege, and intersectionality are just slightly better than Starbucks on the matter. We don't get it in our profession. The way school is traditionally done does not promote the work of anti-racism. So we've had little to no support in figuring out what anti-racism means in our department. And so we're left wondering, can anti-racism even be done in math and in science? Well, given that we need all hands on deck, yes, it can be done in math and science and every subject, and it needs to be done in every subject. Consider, what does it mean that schools are more segregated today than they were in the 1960s? Math, geography. Why is it that COVID-19 has impacted BIPOC communities more, that some countries won't get the vaccine until 2023? Science, health. Why do environmental crises keep happening to Indigenous and Black communities, like what happened in Flint, Michigan? Science, math. In what ways has sports become a site for activism and social change? Football, basketball, all sports. Why is it that the arts that originated in Black communities and countries are considered crafts and not fine art? Why is it that music theory is based on the work of 18th century white musicians, the arts, music? What are the physical and mental health ramifications of racism, health, psychology? There are teachers out there afraid to do this work for fear of being political. But to them, I'll say what I was told early on in my career, that teaching is not neutral. Everything you say, everything you don't say, it carries a message. What you emphasize, what you don't emphasize, carries a message. Right now, what we say is vibrant, is full of life for our white students who see themselves and their worlds and their worth and their stories reflected in every classroom and in every subject. But it is muted It is devoid of color and it is devoid of life for our Black, Indigenous, and students of color who don't read books by people who look like them, whose history is overlooked or taught solely through the lens of oppression, whose math classes and science classes overlook them for advancement to higher level courses, whose music and art classes focus on works by white composers and European stylings, muted. How is the harm we are inflicting on our beautiful Black and brown students by ignoring them and their communities in our pedagogy not political? I argue that it's been political this whole time. So no, I don't think I'm being too political by being an anti-racist teacher. I think I'm doing my best to support my Black, Indigenous, and students of color. And that in doing so, I am elevating the quality of education for all my students. And to finish, I was walking through the park yesterday and I stood at the base of this huge tree. Its trunk was massive and I had to lean my head way back to look at its limbs. I'm humbled by nature, knowing that the thing in front of me has been there for hundreds of years and will be there for hundreds of years after I'm gone. And that's a bit how I feel when I stand at the edge of education and I look out. We've been at it for hundreds of years and it will be here long after we're gone. But my hope is that as a nation, we can shift. As a nation of educators, we can shift. And that as a community, we can support our educators in making this shift, that we can encourage them. Because let me tell you, teachers have gotten backlash. They've been fired, they've been transferred, they've been silenced for their anti-racist work. We can't get this work done without the support of community organizations such as this one, without the support of school boards. We cannot get this work done without the support of parent organizers, and we cannot get the work done without the support of people like you, because our work will only go as far as our community allows us to get. And so I ask that you support anti-racism in education, enjoy the rank of abolitionists whose work is manifold. And though this talk is focused on education, I encourage you to do an everyday act that will make the world a little better in your community, because that's how it gets started. That's how we get this done. Thank you.
Give it up for Joanna. No, more energy. Give it up for Joanna. That was absolutely amazing. I'm riveted, and I appreciate that. The perspectives and truly appreciating the work. And a couple things stood out. Everyday acts, everyday people, which makes me think of a quote by Margaret Mead, when she said, "A small group of thoughtful people could change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." It's what we need. If we're looking to other people to change is going to pass us right by. Which also makes me think about where we look to and what we learn about Black and brown communities, what we are taught, what's missing. For example, the concept of self-care, that came from the Black Panthers. Look it up. That whole idea of taking care of self, Black Panthers. So I want to again thank Joanna for that riveting presentation. And we're going to move into our next performance. I'm thrilled to be able to introduce you all to the work of Dakota Camacho. I have known Dakota for a long time, since they were in high school, and they were an incredible force of nature as spoken word artists, and now they have taken themselves down a road of dance and culture. And one thing to be clear on, in the introduction I'm about to read, is the word for the pronoun that I will be using for Dakota comes from the Chamorro language, and it's Guitza, excuse me. Dakota Camacho believes in creativity as a record of interaction with the spirit realm, exploring the overlap between integrity, ancestral indigenous life ways, true love, and accountability. Guidza activate a Matau worldview to make offerings towards Enefa Maolek, which also means balance and harmony with all of life. Weaving through languages of altar making, movement, film, music, and prayer, Guidza generates moments of encounter with self, each other, spirit, and the natural world. Please give some energy and love to Dakota Camacho.
Anai gumod gupodzo Gilangir huhasu Hi pengata Nui minao let na finatu Lu malaizu Dan hi men yanahu
Hoffa dai mengoffa, Guahusi Dakota Alcantara Kamatsu, Mengoffen te, den Eginzu. Tau tom hom mon den Hedgarnitzu. Maffen Yagudzu, Zepumotsaidzu, Gisen Lagu, Gidza Idanun Koselish. At a young age, my ancestors began to speak to me in poetry. They told me in this way you can heal from the wounds of attempted genocide. I found resonances between Mali'i or Kantan Tamurita and hip-hop. This is my Micronesian navigation channel, an honoring of my cultural and creative lineages, from the south end of Seattle to Ludwest Tsangani, an honoring of Black people, Black cultural production, Black ancestors, an honoring of my ancestors, and I offer these songs in service of our collective liberation.
Nat Lord lad healing nat lad I do hat eating that do. Shout out to Archaeology Edutainment Network, Metaphors, Willa the Mic Killer, Sinanganta. Are you down for the movement? This is Dakota. Coming to y'all live from Dok Obj, Duwamish territory. Back mark that, wake up, back mark that, wake up, back mark that, wake up, back mark that. Be the one to save us. From Pawnee to Palgad, through spiritual contact, our land's being stole, our businesses on contracts. Dear Americans, this is a raw fact. Your morals are the #1 casualty of combat. And what is it we die for? The same reason that the government lies for? Money, we're poor, our vision is cloudy, so we line up beside a board, mission is Saudi. We're military hands taking cemetery lands without looking at their own. Third that they control, our island disappearing and we smashing down this road. Foot on the gas, firing complex at our throats. Survival depends on revival of the ancient, and our people recreating the sacred. So respect and love to my cousins and soldiers, I just wish they were here, defending our culture. Back mark that, wake up, back mark that, wake up, back mark that, wake up, back mark that. Be the one to save us, back mark that, wake up, back mark that, wake up, back mark that, wake up, back mark that. Be the one to save us, back mark that. Puta ligi den tossa. Itanu mami imaga hokya. I had got that kumaku maneku taka. Go munga respect to be thou thoughts. Enough Malik, respect's all we ask for. Not a cash source dying in a task force. Fighting for our culture is the last war. We can't time travel with American passports. It's a culture that we're trying to save. They turn a lively place into a firing range. With sacred medicines growing as native residents. Military heads take without hesitance. Target how, respect the loose song. Why don't they fire their artillery on their lawn? Building fancy homes on my auntie's bones. For dollar bills don't last like Laddie Stone. Mark that, wake up, back mark that, wake up, back mark that, wake up, back mark that. Be the one to save us, back mark that, wake up, back mark that, wake up, back mark that, wake wake up, fact mark that. Be the one to save us. Hoppa gwag, italuta di hilo imen ya nakta. Ifinating nas nihan tatalad wisan galaka. Sama matuli itat lang zan man mi naktak. Man, I gonna hit him and yana guy get pat back. I'm on looking for no to have a gassy iman natas. Name and put looky itasi ni. Now I eat wing that hat. As a guy, munga man my laugh at even ngata. Sa edzu half and we have me maulik na ling that like. United yin and signer. Udala give me that like. Nama act ya we have low we act on me na that ya. Who does the duty min yote hiri I'm what ask ya. Ha na ina imat malana ma chat cotton iha ani have fuck to the up man. Ihina sota lock we have muff to the sack man. Ginin lang get manu eats a hula and I'm a lock fan. Fact mark that the thought no any no ogre and fact mark that. Wake up, fact mark that. Wake up, fact mark that. Wake up, fact mark that. Be the one to save us. Fact mark that. Wake up, fact mark that. Wake up, fact mark that. Wake up, fact mark that. Be the one to save us. Fact mark that. The lineage of the lines that I inscribe as I write poems transcends mind's concepts to timelines and time zones. I'm from the ancient earth crust that birthed us, the primordial is my home. I've flown around with sky gods and walked the jungles with Mother Earth on a tightrope. Made a banyan root as I pray I can understand the truth. Did Brother C to teach me how to heal as I withstand abuse, and Buddha teach me how to be lonely as a bandicoot. As my family moved away from homeland to USA, so implanted roots in our movements became a new trend in human history, visibly called diaspora. Another concept that can capture what we've been through. So my pen moved to trace my line back home, and I roam through the infinite black zone. Classic rocking with my dad's homies, praying as the star of Hawaii's navigating her jazz songs. Africa's children making melodic atlases, indigenous craftsmanship, and I practice this craft so I honor the masters of the free flow. Orisha within the griot, yeah, salute. Hip-hop is that old, I fast forward to sci-fi on 20th and Jackson. Food is the satisfaction food. Ladies first to hip-hop period. As every Sunday night African hands are doing patterns on the drums that go. Canary sings to LD, a rope and I is getting his snack on. Youth speaks, truth speaking, eclipse and gentrification. Community unity's got your back, huh? Back when Setsy Beast was that ceremony and that song. Before the battle in Seattle was won by .coms. No matter the tactics we practice, they say we fought wrong. They murder, enslave, and occupy and drop bombs. We say on Mateo to the way with Mateo and go on.
Finan yagu
All right, welcome back. Please give a whole lot of energy and love to Dakota. That was an incredible performance. I continued to be moved by their artistic growth and cultural growth, and I can't wait to see more of what transpires for this incredible artist. We're going to move forward with another speaker, and I am truly honored to be able to introduce you all to Dr. Bree Hayslip, who I just know as Dr. Bree. Dr. Bree is a powerhouse, connected to racial equity, but also deeply, deeply rooted in a foundation of love. I know Dr. Bree from several presentations, workshops that she has facilitated that literally had me like this, just watching and being moved, while also engaging in equity work, which I think is a rare, rare combination. To feel community, to feel love, to feel seen, to feel valued, while also doing deep inner work is something that I had never seen before. And this seems to be Dr. Bree's superpower. And so I want to welcome you all. I want to welcome Dr. Bree, licensed professional counselor who has done tremendous work in intergenerational trauma. The workshops that I have attended have been titled Pause for Presence. So I invite you all to be present with Dr. Bree.
Thank you, Damon. That was beautiful. And hello, everyone. I am just so moved to be here today. And I have to start out with just deep gratitude. There's so many other things that we could be doing today. And with the craziness of what we're seeing on television and what is going on in the media and all around our world, it feels really good to wake up and today be locked in to be doing something that makes it better, that makes me better. That allows us to show up in a different way for each other. So deep gratitude to all the humans out there. And I really appreciate, I think it's such a humbling thing for someone to do a very honest introduction and use the word love. We hear so much about Dr. Martin Luther King's quotes and some of the brilliant things he did and what he was about and what the movement was about. But one of my favorite quotes is, "Love is the only force capable of changing an enemy to a friend." Love is the only force capable of changing an enemy to a friend. And I'm a psychologist. So yes, you are trapped in a webinar with a therapist. They should have warned you. When we say enemy, it's not an external thing from a psychological perspective. We like to use the language, and I use this with my kids. Your enemy is your inner me. It is your inner me. And I give you that because far too often do we look at social justice as something that's outside of us. We see them, others, community, groups of people. But we are not realizing that, in the words of Dr. Joe Dispenza, we do not see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. We see the world as we are. And so I have to start this talk off with a confession, all right? Because I believe that anything that begins with truth ends in love. And so my confession is that I have been doing equity and inclusion work as a professor and as a consultant all over the world for the last 15 years. And I've spent the first 10 years of my career, y'all, not realizing that I was doing a lot of harm. I was doing a lot of harm. I was incredible. I could rock a house. I could get an audience going. We could get deep into the work. But I didn't understand that doing this work and really helping people involved does not involve shame. You do not have to make people feel like crap to do good work. And I say that because we're not saying empathy enough. And I know it's unpopular. I know it might not be cool to be like, in the midst of this, everybody stand up and find your voice and say it. And I'm like, actually, maybe sit still and feel. Maybe sit down and listen. moving from understanding that people don't grow from shame, like Dr. Brene Brown says. People don't grow and evolve from shame. Helped me to evolve, not only as a consultant, but it made me a better partner, a better mother, a better all around human being. When I started to deal with the fact that you cannot have what you're not willing to become. Let me say that again. You cannot have what you're not willing to become, and you cannot give from what you are not. And so I had to evolve from doing this work for my ancestors to doing it for my great grandchildren. That's a consciousness shift. That is a consciousness shift in looking at how we move forward by taking the accountability for me breaking some of the transgenerational trauma, this thing we keep doing over and over again and passing on to our children, and for me to do something different. I think what we're talking about today is change, y'all. We're talking about change. We're talking about how do we evolve? And that means that we have to look to our great grandchildren. And we have to really invoke this idea that came from Albert Einstein, which is that problems are not solved at the same level they're created. We cannot say white people are doing this and Black and brown people are doing this when our emphasis is on divisiveness, regardless of what you're saying. If the emphasis continues to accentuate that privilege gives you power, then we just continue perpetuating the same thing. Let me break that down. All we talk about is white privilege, male privilege, straight privilege. Those things are important. I taught about them for 10 years. I get it. But here's the implicit bias that your brain picks up. We keep saying that privilege is power, then we start to implicitly tell a generation of young people that where they are born, how they are born, and where they come from is the sum of who they are and who they will be. That's a problem. And I don't care how many scholarly journals say privilege is power, you have to dismantle power. I call bullshit on that. And I say, where you have privilege, you don't have power, you have responsibility. Don't get me wrong, privilege can give you authority. It can put you in a position to take someone's life. One of the hardest days for me this summer was sitting down with my 10-year-old daughter, and she was just crying, watching TV. And it was something that wasn't even as widely televised as some of the other familiar events. But she was watching a Black woman being pulled out of her car with her 3 young children with her. And she was terrified at watching a 7-year-old lay on the ground and be held at gunpoint in front of a nail shop because they thought it was a stolen car. And she cried. So even being a psychologist, what do you do as a parent? But she cried and she was saying, why do they hate us? Like what, why? And all I could see was terror. Like she was really afraid from the trauma of watching this stuff over and over again. And now here is a child younger than her. So that sank in a very different way. And what I told her is this: when I was your age, growing up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, principals were allowed to give us a spanking. Hold on, stay with me. When I was her age, as a young person, you were allowed to get a spanking in school. And she was like, well, what does that have to do with what I'm watching? I said, do not be distracted by what you are watching. Everything changes. And someday your kids will be sitting watching this saying, that used to happen to people? That used to happen? I share that because it takes a ton of courage, y'all, to start moving forward and not teaching our kids fear, not perpetuating fear, and not re-traumatizing our brain by having the same conversations about racism. At some point, we have to evolve. And that evolution comes from you looking at not the enemy, but the inner me, your stuff. How you show up makes a difference. You are responsible for the energy that you bring to a space. And so I have this crazy idea, which I have one follower who's my partner. I have this crazy idea that I'm willing to walk out on a limb with, that I think is exactly what we need right now. I have this crazy idea that social justice is social healing. I have this crazy idea that if we deal with how traumatizing this has been for you, racism is traumatizing for everyone. And I know it's unpopular for a Black person to be talking about white empathy. It's hard to be white. Yes, I said it. I said it. I'm allowed to be white. What does that mean? That means that almost everything, this is me looking at my own stuff, almost everything a white person does, I was trained to see it as racist. That's something we don't say. I was trained to always be skeptical. My reality is that how open am I being to white allies? This summer, another moment that changed my heart was walking out in Seattle. I was with my partner who is a Black man, and we walked out for the Black Lives Matter march in Seattle. And I had never seen so many white people standing up for Black people. Never in my life. I get chills. I'm in tears now. I've never seen that. It baffled my implicit racial bias because this is not supposed to be true. And then we saw other countries standing up for Black Americans. I never thought I would see that in my lifetime. And so I believe as we heal, we can see each other better. I believe that as we heal from our own stuff, we can see our hearts. And if we can see each other, then we can start seeing each other again. We can start building together again. We can start focusing on what's possible. We can start moving forward. And so I want to leave you with what I call the signature traits that were really a part of my evolution, and why I was able to start thinking different, even though it meant being unpopular, even though it meant not saying the thing that people want you to say when you walk into a space, even though sometimes it means walking alone. I believe right now we need to be focused on our healing. So here are the 6 signature traits of healing. The first one is cognizance, being aware of your stuff. One of the things you have to be aware of is how much you're hurting, how much you don't know what to do, not just because of racial trauma, but because of the trauma of every layer of your identity, on top of us being in a traumatic period right now. We are all going through trauma, and that comes with very specific nuances and symptomology that's affecting you in real time. So when you feel afraid, which you should, because there's an apocalyptic pandemic, there's so much going on in the world. But when you feel afraid, your brain goes to its defaults, and that is the seat of your bias. You will be more racist because you are afraid right now at the uneasy state of the world. This is something that you have to be aware of, how you're showing up when you interact with people personally, professionally, romantically, in your family. And so I always ask myself the question, what would you do if you weren't afraid? What would you say if you weren't afraid? What would you become if you weren't afraid? So cognizant is to remember that you're dealing first in fear. And if you can see that, own that, love that, you can see past it, then that's where other people are. But they are not what you see at first. You see you first. You see you first. The second one is courage. Oh, courage. Oh, courage. Courage is about having the humility to share not only your strengths with the world, but your growth edges. We have lost the art of showing each other how much we've grown because we're too afraid to say, I've changed my mind. Or I never thought of it that way. We're so beholden to wanting to be part of a community that we forgot that the real gift of diversity is the ability to think independently together. The ability to think, live, learn, love independently together. It's not the goal for us to be the same. And so we have to show each other our growth edges because our humanity is in our evolution, which means what's our becoming instead of trying to find something to just be and stand for. That is how we start to heal The next one is commitment, y'all. Commitment is about holding yourself and others accountable. I don't always get invited back to my family holidays because I am the one. I am the one. And I'm not always the one that's like, hey, you can't say that and bring it up. I'm also the one that is always bringing up new perspectives. My family is like, every year we have to evolve when she comes to the holidays, right? Like now I'm like, everyone has to meditate all the time. Like every year, your job is to outgrow who you are. You should not be saying the same stuff you were saying last year about this stuff, right? Because problems aren't solved on the same level they were created. The next one is collaboration, which means that you have to combat confirmational bias. Confirmational bias, we're all guilty of it, y'all. Confirmational bias is when you stage your life to only be surrounded by people that feel like you. The worst thing in the world I've heard is people who cut off relationships because someone has different views than them. That is confirmational bias. If all your friends agree with you, that's a problem. You're not trying to grow because growth only happens when you introduce a variable that your brain is not familiar to or with. And that can only happen by being around people that don't think like you. That's the value of diversity of thought. We start to inspire the collective genius. So start thinking about what I had to do, which is inviting people to the table that I really don't want to work with. People I really don't want to work with, go figure. People that it's going to cause some type of conflict and catalyst. If you're not inviting catalyst, then you are just trying to stay the same. And at the end of the day, you're only making one decision. With every decision, you're only making one: evolve or repeat. You're going to do the same thing you've always done, or you will become anew. My challenge for you is to have the commitment to becoming anew. The next one is cultural intelligence, which is diversity of thought. You don't know what you don't know, you don't know. And let me tell you something about the brain. It has a way of tricking you into thinking that you're not doing something that you're totally doing. Like for instance, if I'm like, I don't want to like be their friend just because they're Black. You don't want to be their friend because they're Black. Let me say it again. I mean, it tokenizes them. I don't want to be someone's friend because they're Latina or Latinx. You don't want to be someone's friend because it's the same words, but our brain can change it around to make it look like it's other people and not us. You got to be willing to go look for your things. Because you don't learn this stuff by someone telling you directly. You learn this stuff by the implicit things you pick up. My mom never said, be afraid of white people, but she did slightly push me to the side when we were in the grocery store walking past white people. You have to see your stuff. And the last one is curiosity. And I leave you with this and I close with this. You remember when we were interested in each other? You remember the basic art of being human? Where we ask questions like, what's your cultural background? When we were more curious and learning about someone, and we had the cognitive stamina for someone to be talking about their beliefs without the need for us to agree or disagree. These are the 6 signature traits of my healing, and I give them to you today because I believe in healing-centered social justice. And that comes from a real basic idea that is my mantra for 2021. Pause for presence when I say it. No one is coming. No one is coming to save us. If we're waiting for some community leader, if we're waiting for another MLK, if we're waiting for the new administration, if you're waiting for your partner, if you're waiting for someone to come save you, no one is coming. And you save you. You're what you need. And it's only one decision away from that change that really changes society, and that is evolve or repeat. So I leave you with the only way, the most effective way to deal with change is to change. It's the change. Thank you so much for my time. Mwah, mwah, mwah. Mwah.
I didn't lie. I didn't lie. Give it up for Dr. Bree. Give some serious energy for Dr. Bree. I got a whole bunch of stuff, and I've seen Dr. Bree present on numerous occasions, and every time I get different things. This time, no one is coming to save us.